This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. Also, make sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube original channel, UCTV Prime, available only on YouTube.
Good evening and welcome to the Birch Aquarium. My name is Nigella Hilgarth and I'm the Executive Director here at the Birch Aquarium at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the latest Geoffrey B. Graham Perspectives on Ocean Science lecture series. And tonight we have a really very special lecture by a very special speaker. And that is especially because Andy Nosal was a graduate student of Geoffrey B. Graham, in whose name this lecture series is honoring. Jeff was a remarkable scientist at Scripps, a world expert on sharks, among other things, but also he was director here at the aquarium for over a couple of years. And he passed away a few months ago, and so it is very special to have his graduate student, Andy, here tonight. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Andy, and then we'll start the lecture. Andy, in fact, is due to finish his PhD, I believe it's December. No pressure, Andy. And he focuses on various aspects of leopard shark behavior and reproduction, with a very special emphasis on the causes and the biological implications of the leopard shark aggregation that forms along La Jolla Shores every spring, summer, and fall. I'm sure many of you have seen them. In 2007, Andy graduated from the University of Virginia with a bachelor's degree in biology with specialization in environmental and biological conservation. And during that time, he also did some work in the University of Queensland in Australia, looking at presumably sharks, maybe other things too, on the Great Barrier Reef. And in 2008, he also worked in Chile, did some investigation of shark finning in that area. And Andy also works with us doing outreach at Birch Aquarium, trying to promote shark conservation among the public and improve public education in that area, something that we need a lot. So without any further ado, Andy, please come and start tonight's lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming and welcome. I also want to thank the Birch Aquarium for inviting me to speak this evening about one of my favorite animals, the leopard shark, an animal that has completely consumed the last 5 years of my life as a PhD student here at Scripps. And the time it's paid off, and we're learning a lot about the reasons why these leopard sharks aggregate every spring, summer, and fall at the southern end of La Jolla Shores beach, only about a mile from where you're all sitting tonight. So the underlying theme of tonight's presentation is to start to get at the causes for why these sharks are here and what makes the La Jolla aggregation sites so special, as opposed to, say, 200 meters up the beach. But I want to begin with a bit of an introduction to leopard shark life history. The leopard shark, whose species name is Triechis semifasciata, is endemic to the western coast of North America. That means it's found here and nowhere else in the world. And they range from Samish Bay, Washington, which is north of Seattle, down south to Mazatlan, Mexico, including the Gulf of California and the Channel Islands. So here we are in La Jolla, right in the center of that range. And now, without a doubt, this species is one of the most beautifully marked sharks in existence today. They've got this just stunning spot and saddle pattern, which of course gives us the very appropriate name of the leopard shark. And no two sharks look exactly the same. The spotting pattern is as unique as a fingerprint, and it makes it useful for identifying individuals both in the field and also in captivity. And there are even some leopard sharks that sort of break the mold, and This is an example. We have one here at the Birch Aquarium. If you haven't seen this individual, please take a look in the kelp tank before you leave. We call this pattern scribbled pattern because it looks like a 2-year-old got a hold of a big Sharpie and just went to town on the leopard shark. They're very rare, and we once thought this was maybe a different species, but it turns out it is for sure a leopard shark with a unique genetic morph. So that'll be something that we try to study in the future. The leopard shark gets to be about 6 feet long. That's the maximum size. There's an unconfirmed report of a 7-foot leopard shark, but most of the ones you see in La Jolla will be about 4 to 5 feet. Their lifespan is estimated to be about 25 to 30 years. It's an estimate. What we know for sure is that they live to be at least 20 years. And we know that because back in 1979, a leopard shark was tagged in San Francisco Bay and recaptured 20 years later in 1999 around the same area. So we know they live to be at least 20 years old, plus however old it was when it was tagged. So that observation coupled with growth estimates leads us to that 25 to 30 year figure. That being said, the leopard shark doesn't reach maturity until it gets to be about halfway through its life cycle at about 10 to 15 years old. So that would be like a human not maturing until they're 30 or 40 years old. Now, that is one of the inherent problems with shark conservation. Sharks are what we call case-selected species, meaning that they have a slow growth rate, they're late to mature, they have relatively few offspring. And these characteristics make their populations very vulnerable to decline because of overexploitation. So this is one of the reasons we have to be careful with leopard sharks and other sharks as well. These leopard sharks, they give birth in the spring, usually in May to June. They give birth to litters of live pups, ranging anywhere from 5 pups to 30 pups, depending on the size of the mom. The larger the mom, the more pups she can fit inside of her. Now, these pups are born with all the instincts that they need to survive: how to hunt, how to avoid predators. And that's very important because the leopard shark has no parental care at all. The pups don't stay with the mom. As soon as they're born, they're off on their own. And the same goes for every other shark species. There's no parental care. So these little guys, they're pretty small. They're only about 8 inches long when they're born. And if you haven't had a chance to, we've got some live ones in the back for you to see at the end. They're very good at hiding. They can get into surf grass. They can get into crevices or rocks and caves. But even though they're really good at hiding, they still have a lot of predators to watch out for, namely any fish that's bigger than it, but also some animals you don't always think about, including birds. So this osprey got a hold of a baby leopard shark. So did this great blue heron, and even this little gull, who probably bit off more than he could chew. So once the leopard sharks get older, they don't have to worry about birds, but then they have to start to worry about larger sharks, including the 7-gill shark, which we have quite a few of here in La Jolla. Also the great white, which we also have a few of here in La Jolla. But perhaps the most formidable natural predator for leopard sharks, especially here in La Jolla, are these guys: bull California sea lions, or male California sea lions. These animals have become amazingly proficient at killing leopard sharks, and I'll be showing you a few pictures later showing what these animals are capable of and how we think that this predatory behavior might actually be influencing the leopard shark's movement patterns and their behavior. Now, aside from all of these natural predators, leopard sharks also have to worry about humans. Nowadays, there's a fairly popular recreational fishery for leopard sharks. They're a lot of fun to catch. I know from personal experience they put up a good fight, especially on light tackle, so that's why they are very attractive to be captured. Also from what I've been told, they're good eating if they're prepared properly. But with the right protective measures, minimum size requirements, bag limits, the leopard sharks seem to be doing pretty well today. But a few decades ago, the same could not be said. There was also a commercial fishery, which was largely targeting white sea bass using nearshore bottom-set gill nets. And these gill nets were catching a lot of leopard sharks. And so you'll notice here that in the mid-1980s, the number of leopard sharks that were landed steadily declined until about the mid-1990s, where the decline stopped and maybe even there was a little bit of an increase in landings. That appears to be due to the 1994 ban on bottom-set gill nets within 3 miles of shore in Southern California. So these gill nets were very effective at catching leopard sharks, and by removing them from the water, we could see a measured increase, especially if you look at catch per unit effort, which we often use as a proxy for population size, steadily increased after 1995 and into the early 2000s. And presumably it continues to increase, or it's at least stable where it is now. So leopard sharks are doing fairly well in California. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for the leopard shark population in Mexico. Gill nets are still widely used there. They are often set perpendicular to the coast, so as the sharks swim up and down the coast, it's like running the gauntlet, and it would be unthinkable for a shark not to be captured with one of these nets. So we don't have any hard evidence to show a decline. It's mostly based on anecdotal evidence, talking to fishermen who say that they don't see as many as they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But these observations warrant further investigation, so hopefully we'll be able to start to analyze the population, and if indeed it has declined, to take the proper measures to restore their population. But as I said, in California, they're doing really well, and that's really good for La Jolla, because we love leopard sharks here in La Jolla. They're not only extremely important to our local marine environment, being one of the most abundant nearshore predators, but they're also very important for our local economy, particularly our ecotourism industry. Thousands of people come to see the leopard shark aggregation every year, which forms just south of La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club. They spend a lot of money at our local dive, snorkel, and kayak shops, at our hotels, at our restaurants. So these sharks are a very valuable asset to our local community. And for that reason, it's a really good thing that they are protected completely by a no-take marine reserve. So I don't have the boundaries up here on the map, but it runs roughly from Point La Jolla northward and then terminates south of Scripps Pier. So the entire aggregation site is protected by a no-take reserve. But despite the importance of the leopard shark for the local marine environment, for the local human community, we still didn't really know why they were there, what the causes of this aggregation were. So this was the impetus for the research that I have been doing for my dissertation. So the first question I wanted to know when I came to Scripps and I heard about these leopard sharks is, how long have we known about this and no one's done anything about it? And so I was able to go back as far as 1950 to the original collection notes of Scripps professor Carl Hubbs. And thanks to HJ and Cindy at the Marine Vertebrate Collection, they were able to scan one of the pages from his collection notebook for you all to see tonight. So I'll just take you through a few of the key parts here. So the date, August 3rd, 1950. The locality, just south of La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club on La Jolla Shores. Method of capture, 2 hauls of a 128-foot long beach seine. So if you've never seen a beach seine, it's just a really long net. Usually you need a few people to operate it. They carry it over the water at first, they drop it down, and they drag it back to shore. And anything that's in its way on the way back gets captured. So they're using a beach seine, and what did they capture? Traechus semifasciata, the leopard shark, 3 large adults. Now they didn't catch 100 leopard sharks, they didn't catch the whole aggregation, but they caught a bunch of leopard sharks. They also caught a bunch, 27 large adult Rhinobatus productus, which is the shovel-nosed guitarfish. So if you've been snorkeling with the leopard sharks, you know they're not alone. They've got company out there, a lot of other sharks and rays. Also 16 small Urobatus hilarii, which are the round stingray that everybody gets stung by every year on La Jolla Shores. So a lot hasn't changed at this one site in 60 years. But the brightest minds at Scripps knew about these sharks, and nothing had ever been done. So this is why I was so inspired to try to figure these out. So once again, the overarching question, what are the causes for this leopard shark aggregation in La Jolla? And to try to get at those causes, I asked more specific research questions. The first one was, who are these leopard sharks demographically speaking? Are they males? Are they females? Are they mature? Are they immature? And by finding that out, we can start to get clues as to what the sharks might be doing at this site. So in order to answer this question, who are the leopard sharks, we non-lethally sampled, I think it was about nearly 150 sharks. And so we caught them, we measured them, we determined whether they were male or female. We put a spaghetti tag in them, right here at the base of the dorsal fin, and then released them. So the spaghetti tags serve 2 purposes. One is so that we know who we've already sampled, so we don't sample the same shark twice in case we happen to catch one, and that did happen a couple of times. And also in case the shark happens to leave the protected area and be captured by a fisherman, the fisherman can then call me up or report online where the shark was captured, and we can start to get an idea for where the sharks are going when they leave the aggregation site. So just as an example, here is a shark that was captured by a fisherman, and you can see the spaghetti tag right there. Still very clean. Which means that we had just tagged the shark, I think, a week or 2 before. And luckily, the fisherman released it. And we really thanked him for that. We always encourage catch and release for sharks, especially these leopard sharks. But we were able to get some information about this. Now, I would like to, it's a bit of show and tell today as well. I've got 2 pairs of spaghetti tags that I'm going to pass around the room. Each pair has a brand new tag, so you can see what it looks like before it's been on a shark. And the other one has a tag that's been on a shark for about a year or two, so you can see how beat up they get. And so I would love to know how beat up the tag was that was on the shark for 20 years. I can only imagine what that one looked like. So I'll pass these around, and just by the end, if you can just make sure those get back to me. Thank you. So what did we find after this demographic study? We found that most of these sharks were female. 97% of them were female, only 3% were male, and all of them were of a length indicating sexual maturity. And in 22 cases where we had the opportunity to determine whether one of these females was pregnant, either by conducting an ultrasound or having the shark give birth in captivity, all of those were pregnant. So, who are these leopard sharks? Mostly mature pregnant females. Now, what does this tell us about some of the potential causes for the aggregation? A lot of people used to think, and still think, that the sharks are there to mate. If they were there to mate, I would expect the sex ratio to be roughly 50-50, or at least a bit closer to 50-50 than 97-3. So as far as we can tell, although some mating might take place, there are a few lucky males there, it's probably not the primary function of the aggregation. Now, you might also say all these pregnant females are here. Could they be giving birth? Again, if you've been snorkeling out there, you'll know that seeing baby leopard sharks, or anything under 3.5 to 4 feet, which is around the size they get to be mature, is pretty rare. We typically only see the adults. So given the fact that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these pregnant females, each one capable of producing up to 30 to 35 pups, you would think we might see a few more pups if the purpose of the aggregation was to give birth. Now, maybe the pups are really well hidden. After all, they're small. There's a lot of places to hide there in the rocky reef and the seagrass. Or maybe they're all just getting eaten. I don't know. But the jury's still out on that one. So we still need to do a little bit more exploration in there and see if we can find if there are actually pups hiding out. Now, the second two questions we had: when are the sharks present at the aggregation site on both a daily and a seasonal timescale? So when do they come every day? When do they come every year? And when the sharks are at the aggregation site, what exactly are they doing? What's their behavior like? What are their movement patterns like? Again, all to try to get clues to get back to that overarching question of the causes. So in order to determine these second two questions, when are the sharks present and what are the sharks doing at the aggregation site, we use two different methods of acoustic telemetry, or acoustic tracking. The first one is called active acoustic tracking, and it involves tagging a shark with an acoustic transmitter tag. It's also called a pinger tag. So we put it on the outside of the shark. It doesn't hurt the shark. The fin is made of cartilage like our ear, so it's kind of like a fancy, a very expensive earring that we put in the shark. And the transmitter has both a temperature and a pressure sensor on it to give us information about the temperature of the water the shark is in, and also the depth of the shark. So I've got a tag here. I'm going to demonstrate how it works in just a moment. So listening for the pings underwater, the sound underwater, is a hydrophone, which is located at the bottom of this staff. I'm going to go ahead and lift this up so you can see. So obviously this part would actually be in the water. And we can rotate this underwater to figure out where the signal is the strongest. So this is what we call a directional hydrophone, meaning it's only listening in one straight line. So as we do these sweeps going back and forth, this is after we've released the tagged shark, we can determine where the signal is strongest, zero in on it, and that's where the shark is, and that's how we proceed to follow it. And we'll follow it for up to 48 hours nonstop. We're out there day and night. Now finally, the hydrophone is attached to an acoustic receiver, or like a computer unit. And I've got that here as well. And the purpose of this receiver is to decode the pings. In other words, it will display the temperature and the pressure on the screen here. So once we release the shark, every 5 minutes we record the temperature and the pressure that's displayed on this receiver unit, and we take a GPS point. So over the course of 48 hours, we get very fine-scale movement patterns in a 5-minute resolution. So I'm just going to show you how all this works. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the receiver, and it's tuned into a frequency of 57 kilohertz. And that's important because this tag will transmit at 57 kilohertz. The tags can be programmed to transmit at different frequencies. So just like your car radio, you tune it into a certain channel. That's exactly what we do here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. You might be able to hear a little bit of static, and that's only because the tag is not on yet. To turn it on, I have to take off this little magnet here. Once the magnet is off, it should turn on. And within a couple of seconds, it will start to display. Can you all hear that in the back? Just some beeping. It'll start to display temperature. So right now it's displaying 19.4 degrees Celsius, so about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and 0.0 meters. So that makes sense because we're not underwater. So at least the tag is working. Now, if you'd like to have a closer look at this later, feel free to come up and I can show you. Now you just heard the pinging sound there for 10 seconds. So you can imagine hearing that for 48 hours nonstop. It starts to make you a little crazy. So that's to get fine-scale movement patterns. Now, to get longer-term presence-absence data at various sites along the coast, we use another method called passive telemetry or passive acoustic monitoring. Now, it uses an acoustic transmitter, a tag, just like this. But because we're now going to be dealing with 3 years, these things will now last 3 years, there's no way we're going to put this on the outside of the shark like the active tracking, because after a while it's going to get fouled up, things are going to start growing on it, it's going to get snagged on a rock or kelp or something, it's going to get pulled out. There's no way it's going to last for 3 years. So to circumvent that problem, we surgically implant it into the shark. So to do that, we catch the shark, we put it on its back onto this special V-board. It actually has a little hole cut in the bottom for the fin to fit through. It's kind of like a hammock for the shark. When the shark goes on its back, it enters a state of hypnosis called tonic immobility. We still don't exactly know the biological basis for it, but they essentially go to sleep, and that's how that's our anesthesia. We make a small incision about 1 inch long, plop the tag in, suture it up, and off it goes. So that whole process takes about 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes of the shark out of the water. We've never had a death, so we have a really good success rate. Once the shark is released, it's no longer being listened to by a hydrophone connected to a big receiver like this. It's being listened to by this, an underwater acoustic receiver, which as you can see over there is on an underwater mooring. Now, instead of a directional hydrophone that's only listening in one line, this now is an omnidirectional hydrophone listening 360 degrees. It has a detection range of about 1,000 feet. So in other words, we have now a detection circle of about 2,000 feet diameter. So every time one of the sharks with one of these tags enters this detection range, the receiver records the time, the date, and the code for that particular shark. So over the course of 3 years, we know exactly which sharks were present at which receivers and when. Very fine-scale data over the course of 3 years. And every couple of months, we dive on the receivers to download the data. So I want to show you, before I get to the actual data, I'll show you where we have receivers. We have receivers going up and down the coast. Of course, we have we have several in La Jolla that cover the entire aggregation site, but we also have receivers ranging from the border near the mouth of the Tijuana River, actually past Del Mar into Carlsbad is our one that's farthest north now. So now I'll show you a little bit about what this detection data looks like, but because we're limited on time, I'm only going to show you the one from La Jolla. Now, we display the detection data in a special form called an actogram, this funny-looking graph up here. And just to show you what's going on here, we're going to zoom in on just this little square right here. Each actogram spans 24 hours from midnight to midnight, and each line going down is a different day, starting at the date of tagging back in summer of 2009 up until the summer of 2011. So this is a 2-year span. In a couple of weeks when we finish downloading the data, we'll have a complete 3-year record. And every little black square you see there is a detection made by the receiver. So wherever you see black, that's where the shark was present at the aggregation site. So all of a sudden you see that there is a clear diel day-night difference where the sharks are present more often during the day between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. than at night. So that's why it's darker in here. Obviously the sharks are not going too far when they leave at night because we're still getting sporadic detections at night on both sides here. But there's clearly more detections happening during the day. But the most amazing thing that we found was if you look at actograms from individual sharks, so here's an example from 8 sharks, the actograms are all lined up, there was remarkable synchrony. The sharks really were traveling together, particularly in the times where they departed the aggregation site, where it goes from black to white. Okay, here in the winter of 2009, also seen down here, and at least the time when some of them arrived back at the aggregation site in July. So one of the first questions we had then, once we saw this, was, well, what was causing this synchronous departure and arrival of the sharks? They must all be queuing into something. So we were thinking maybe there was like a storm, or the water temperature change, something like that. But when these sharks left in 2009, they actually left on Thanksgiving. And we thought that was kind of weird. If you happen to remember what you were doing on Thanksgiving in 2009, you might remember that it was an absolutely beautiful day. It was warm, the water was flat as a lake, it was absolutely gorgeous. There seemed to be no reason for the leopard sharks to leave. But if you were at the southern end of Jolla Shores beach, you also saw this. A bull California sea lion decided to come in, and it was Thanksgiving, and he killed at least 3 leopard sharks, probably more. At least 3 were the ones that washed ashore. And as I mentioned, these sea lions are very proficient at killing leopard sharks, and they do it in a very special way. They grab them just underneath the gills, and they thrash them above the water with such force that the part that they're biting ends up pulling out all of their internal organs. And that's the part that they eat. Now, it might seem kind of wasteful, but if you think about a sea lion, well, if you think about the shark's internal organs, it's mostly consistent of large fatty liver, and because these are pregnant sharks, they have all the embryos in there, but because the embryos are underdeveloped, they still have a very large yolk sac. So there's a lot of nutrients for the sea lion to eat, and that's all that he eats. So the rest of the shark washes ashore, horrifies the tourists, I get a bunch of calls, and then we also get a bunch of photos from scuba divers that find similar things down near the aggregation site. So it's pretty amazing, and that's what we think happened here. They essentially got scared away. The following year, they stayed a little bit longer until around Christmas time. And here, there was a big storm. We correlated their departure with a large storm with large waves that churns up a lot of the deeper, colder water. The surface water temperature dropped from about 18 degrees Celsius down to 13 degrees Celsius very quickly within less than a day. And that seems to be what caused them to take off this time. But obviously there's a lot of other interesting things. Why did the sharks come back here as well as here? So over the next couple of months, as I finish my analyses before I defend, we'll be trying to correlate these patterns with other environmental variables like barometric pressure, wind speed, wave heights, cloud cover, things like that, to see if other environmental factors might be contributing to these movement patterns. And so now I want to tell you a little bit about the results of the active tracking, the fine-scale following of the sharks. So although every shark was slightly different, there was a general pattern. The sharks tended to stay near the aggregation site during the day. So all of those little yellow triangles, those are all the 5-minute GPS points that we were taking. But then at night, they tended to move offshore into the deeper, colder waters of La Jolla Canyon, and they also came north here, and eventually they would always come back and be back at the aggregation site before the sun came up. Now, before I get into what the sharks were doing in the canyon, because I think we have a pretty good idea what they were doing, I want to share just a quick story about this particular track to illustrate the difficulty of this sort of work. The active tracking was really plagued with bad luck from the start. I don't think we had a single track that went without a hitch. The first shark that we tagged, the tag fell off without us knowing, so we spent 48 hours tracking a tag with no shark. We had the engine fail like 3 times, so we had to abandon tracks. Sometimes we were able to go back out and find the shark again. One time my intern got a little too excited and turned the wheel of the boat too hard and got it stuck so that all we could go around was in circles, and that wasn't going to be very helpful if the shark started to move. But this track, it was going so well. We had gotten through the first 24 hours without a problem. The shark was doing cool things. It was really neat. Then after 24 hours, we typically switch crews. So we got off, another crew of 2 guys got on. Of course, I was on call. I had my cell phone with me in case something happened. So while I'm at home, getting ready to go to bed, dreaming about what the shark is doing while I'm not on the boat, I get a call around 10 o'clock. It says, Andy, we're on the boat. The shark is doing really cool things. It's diving in the canyon. It's going north. It's going north. But we just bumped into the key of the ignition, snapped it out, the engine's off, and now we can't turn it back on. Do you still have the shark? Of course, that was my first instinct. Not, are you okay? Is the shark still there? You still have the signal? yeah, but the signal's getting kind of weak. It's moving away. So I was like, oh no. So I call Nick Wegner, who's in my lab, say, hey, can you come, bring a boat? We're going to go try to bring them an extra key. And at this point, they were right off the pier. I mean, they weren't far away. So as we're taking the boat out there, we can see their lights. I'm wondering, oh man, another shark. We're going to lose another shark. And as we get closer, I start to hear the pings. They hadn't lost the signal. The shark was either still there and just stationary, or the tag had fallen off again, but they still had the signal. And as we got closer, we saw them rowing like they've never rowed before. They did not want to face me, and having lost the shark, so they rowed. So just to give you an idea, that's the sort of dedication that some of these volunteers, people in the lab, had gone through. So they were rowing for a good hour, keeping up with that shark, and they didn't lose it. And then we got them a key around here, and then, actually it was probably a little bit more around here, and then we were able to finish the track. So I learned to lower my expectations and then be pleasantly surprised. So if we went out fishing and we went for a track or something, as long as the boat didn't sink and nobody died, that was a good day. That was a good day. So getting back to this, again, this amazing track that was saved by my volunteers rowing, the shark went into the canyon. Why would the shark go into the deep, dark, cold waters of the canyon when it can just stay in the nice, shallow, warm waters of the aggregation site? So of course, our first instinct, I'm sure many of you are thinking the same thing, is they must be feeding on something down there. So what lives in the canyon that the sharks might like to feed on? Well, the most obvious thing that we thought of was market squid, which as many of you know, are known to spawn in the canyon at night. Usually we think of squid runs happening in the winter, but they happen sporadically throughout the year. But in order to test whether the leopard sharks were actually feeding on the squid, we had to do a little bit of a mini diet study. And instead of killing a bunch of leopard sharks, cutting open their stomach and seeing what they ate, we did a non-lethal method called gastric lavage. And this involves, I know it sounds kind of funny, this involves catching the shark, bringing it onto the boat, putting it on its back again to sort of induce that sort of anesthesia. And then we insert a PVC tube down into the shark's throat and into its stomach. That's the gastric part. And then the lavage part comes where we put a seawater hose down, flood the stomach, and then sort of, wriggle it around. And then we take the shark, put it upside down, and then all the stomach contents come out and we catch it in a spaghetti strainer. And after doing this to 70 sharks, all of which survived, we found that the sharks came up with stomachs that were full of these market squid. Not only the squid, they were also eating octopus and crab and lobster and a few small fish, but clearly the squid were the most important part of their diet. So now we had direct evidence that the sharks were benefiting from this local food source right near the aggregation site. So getting now back to the causes of the aggregation, why would they come back to the same spot every time? There's no food really right there, but they're close to another food source. So by coming back to the aggregation site every day, it's almost like a staging ground. They're in a good position to go foraging as soon as the sun goes down, as opposed to being nomadic, traveling up and down the coast where they might not always have access to such an abundant food source. So the proximity to the canyon and also the nearby rocky reef, which is probably where they got the crabs and the octopus, that is one of the causes, we think, for the aggregation being where it is, because of proximity to food. Now, the active tracking also showed us how shallow the leopard sharks were. Remember, they had a depth sensor on them. What we found is what the sharks were typically spending most of their time at 2 meters or less in the water. Very, very shallow. So shallow that they were often at or inside the surf zone, so the waves were just breaking on top of them. Now, I'm sure the waves don't bother the sharks that much, but why deal with the extra water turbulence if you can just go a few feet deeper and have really calm water? So there must have been a reason for them to be pushing so shallow. And what we think is going on is that the shallow water is also the warmest water. And leopard sharks are cold-blooded. They're ectothermic like most sharks. And so their body temperature is dictated by their surroundings. In other words, the water temperature. So they're going to be the same. So as the sharks are pushing into warmer water, they're increasing their body temperature. And when your body temperature increases, metabolism goes up, the rate of digestion goes up, body growth goes up, including the growth of the little embryos that are inside of the pup, or inside of the mom. So what we think is going on is these females are incubating. They are doing kind of what a mother bird does, sitting on her eggs to keep them warm and maintain that optimal temperature for development. They're sitting in these warm waters to do the same thing. So by increasing the rate of embryonic development, they are decreasing the gestation period, which I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, it's 10 to 12 months. It's longer than a human. So if they can shave off a few weeks and get those pups out a little sooner, they're probably going to do that. But there's more to it than that. There's warm water all over the place, okay, in San Diego. We're pretty lucky where we live, but there's something special about where the leopard sharks are here. This is a map of wave height, not water temperature, wave height. So the oranges are higher waves, okay, and the blue colors are lower, smaller waves. And where the leopard shark aggregation is, which is illustrated by this red dotted line, this is a statistical thing called a 95% kernel utilization distribution. All you need to know is that it's roughly where the sharks can be found 95% of the time. So this is what we use to delineate the aggregation. It's located mostly in this area of low wave height. We call that a divergent zone. And the reason that that's there is because of La Jolla Canyon. As the swell propagates over the canyon, the bathymetry causes the wave energy, the wave rays, to be refracted or diverted away from the head where the sharks are. This results in low waves here, and this is a convergent zone here. That's why all the surfers are there, and even up here in Black's Beach. That's why the waves are so large. It's because of the action of the bathymetry of the canyons. The lower waves might be nice for the leopard sharks. They might like calmer water, but what's more important, the lower waves mean less mixing, less churning up of slightly cooler, deeper waters. And so the water tends to be slightly more stagnant here. It stratifies a little bit. It becomes a little bit warmer, only about 1/2 degree warmer than surrounding areas. But sharks can detect that, and it might just be enough to attract them and keep them in this general area. So wave height and wave refraction is a very important part of why the leopard sharks are there. But there's more. Zooming in now. Again, we've got the marine room here. This is the 95% KUD, so this is like the 95% probability of finding the sharks in here. This is their core area. Here's the canyon, La Jolla Canyon. It just so happens that the aggregation is located directly over the seismically active Rose Canyon Fault. Now, just to show you how their movement patterns relate to the location of the fault, these are all of the 5-minute GPS positions that we took. There's over 2,500 that fall within this 95% KUD. I'm going to go ahead and add a best fit line going through those points, and then I'm going to project all of the points. I'm going to move all of the points onto the best fit line, the nearest point on that best fit line, and finally create a density histogram going across. And what we found that the greatest concentration of the sharks' movements, where they were spending the most amount of time, was centered directly over the Rose Canyon Fault. Now, maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe there's something about the fault to which the sharks are either attracted or somehow using it as a reference point or a landmark or something. So some possibilities could be, there could be a magnetic anomaly associated with the fault line. This has been reported for other fault lines like this that separate two different kinds of rock types. Sharks are known to detect magnetic fields, and they've been long hypothesized to use magnetic anomalies for navigation, for reference points, so it's possible. But the magnetic field has never been mapped in this area, so that's something we're going to be working on over the next year or so to see if there might be something to that. It also could be possible that groundwater, fresh water, is seeping up through the fault line. There's certainly aquifers under here. If you've done a lot of snorkeling and diving, especially in this area, I'm sure many of you have actually seen some of the fresh water trickling up. We don't know, though, if a lot is coming up through the fault. That's something we really have to look at, try to do some fine-scale salinity measurements. But again, this is something we're going to be working on maybe as a postdoc or something in the next year or two. So to summarize thus far, and we're getting toward the end now, the leopard shark aggregation is located in this wave divergence zone, this area of low wave height. The sharks inhabit very shallow water, usually less than 2 meters, often at or inside the surf, probably trying to exploit the warm, shallow waters to incubate, to increase the rate of gestation, again, because these are mostly pregnant females. And they are close to this abundant food source in the canyon where the squid are, and also the rocky reef over here, where there are crustaceans and other things like that for them to eat. But could there be something else going on? We've thought about all these great reasons why all these females are here, but where are the males? We would think that the males would like all these same things, nice, calm, warm water in La Jolla, a lot of food, not to mention, tons of females around, but for some reason, the males don't come here. And we're still trying to figure out why that's the case. But could the females be avoiding the males? Could they benefit from the absence of the males? And we think that they do. They benefit from harassment by the males in the form of excessive mating attempts. If any of you know anything about shark mating, it's, how can I put this? It can be violent. There's biting involved, there's bleeding and scarring. The females obviously have to mate once a year to fertilize their eggs and procreate, but if they can avoid excessive mating, which might not really help them, they would be expected to do that, because the female can incur injury during mating and she can even die if she's mated with too many times. So what we think is that the females are avoiding the males. Now, in order to test that, we need to look at the paternity genetics of the leopard shark litter. See, leopard sharks, the females can actually store sperm for multiple matings. They store it in a special gland called the oviducal gland, which is located on top of the uterus. And when the shark ovulates, the eggs pass through that oviducal gland where the sperm is being stored and are fertilized with whatever sperm is there. If it's from a single male, all the pups will have the same father. If there are multiple male sperm there, then the pups will have multiple fathers, depending on how many males the female mated with. So we wanted to look at that. What percentage of litters actually had multiple fathers, or how many had single fathers? And so what we did was we caught 22 pregnant females from the aggregation site, put them in a holding tank, and brought them back to Scripps Pier. We hoisted them up, and we allowed them to give birth in captivity. Now, when we brought them back, we conducted ultrasounds on them to be sure that they were all pregnant. So you can see here, again, the shark is on its back. We're conducting an ultrasound. And some of the things that we look for in the ultrasound are the head of the pup. So there it is right there with the little mouth. Over here, you can see the head moving and the little left pectoral fin right there. We see beating hearts for the little babies and even the spine of the babies. So these are the kind of things that we look for to confirm pregnancy. Now, we only did this for the first 5 to 10 females that we brought in. All of them were pregnant, so we figured, okay, they must all be pregnant. And sure enough, even though we didn't conduct ultrasounds on the other 12 females, they all ended up giving birth. We've never caught a female for the purpose of having a giving birth and it didn't give birth. They've always been pregnant. Once the pups are born, they're super cute. We let them live for a couple of weeks, grow up, make sure they start eating, and then we take a tiny little fin clip, a little tissue sample from the back of their dorsal fin. Let's see if they can get a, yeah, they're all sort of straight up and down. It's hard to see, but just the little trailing tip of the dorsal fin, the one that would stick up out of the water. And then we do the same thing for mom. And once we have tissue samples from all the pups and mom, we can then get their DNA and start to look at their genes. And because we have mom's genes and pup's genes, we know which genes came from mom because we can match them back. And so all the ones that we can't match back to mom must have come from a father. And depending on how many of those paternal genes, the ones that could not have come from mom that we find, we can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation and figure out how many fathers are represented in the litter. And what we found was that 63%, 64% of the litters had only one father. They were monogamous. And 36% had 2 fathers. So we didn't have any more than 2. Now, 36% might still seem like kind of a lot, considering our hypothesis was that they should be able to avoid males here, but it's definitely on the low side for sharks. Some sharks their frequency of multiple paternity is over 90%, and some of them have 3, 4, 5 fathers in every single litter. So this is definitely on the low side, and we think that this is consistent with our hypothesis of them being successfully able to avoid excess mating attempts by the males. So, in conclusion, what are the causes of the leopard shark aggregation? If I had to boil it down to the 3 most likely causes, the first one would be thermoregulation. These are all pregnant females. They're doing what mother birds do. They are sitting in warm water to keep the rate of gestation going. So that's one thing that we do. And remember, the water here is especially calm, and it's a little bit warmer than any of the surrounding area, so that could explain why they're there. They like that nice warm water. Number 2, it's close to a predictable food source. In other words, the squid in the canyon and also the crustaceans and other things that are in the rocky reef. And lastly, I think they're there to avoid harassment by the males. They seem to be able, and that's reflected in the paternity, so they're able to avoid some of these excessive mating attempts. So with that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I want to thank a whole lot of people. Of course, I want to thank Jeff Graham, who, as you heard before, was my advisor for the first 4.5 years of my time at Scripps, and I was pretty green when I came here, and he taught me how to think like a scientist, and so I'm very, very grateful to him for that, and I wish he were here. I want to thank Phil Hastings as well, who's my advisor now. He welcomed me into the lab without reservation, made the transition very smooth and seamless, so I'm very grateful to him. All the other folks you see up there have been volunteers, people in the lab who spent those long, cold nights on the boat with me and tracked these sharks. Of course, I want to thank my funding sources, and of course the Birch Aquarium for inviting me here tonight. And I want to thank you for your company this evening, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have now. Yes, sir. So the question was that the sharks are they're sensitive to electrical fields, not only magnetic field. That is true. That's how they use their electroreception to find prey, especially buried in the sand. Magnetic field and electrical fields are quite closely related. So we think, well, one of the ways we think that sharks can detect magnetic fields is through their electrosense. We don't exactly know the fine-scale physics behind it, but that's one of the hypotheses. A lot more work needs to be done on that. So. But as far as like an electrical field on its own, like maybe there's like a submerged pipe or some sort of weird thing that's giving off some sort of, I don't know. But one of the ways we think that they can detect the magnetic field is through their electrosense. So, yes, ma'am. It's a great question. So the question was, well, why don't the males follow the females into the aggregation site? We still don't know. It is most likely a matter of habitat preference. That's what I'm guessing. Maybe the males prefer slightly cooler water. You would think that they'd be able to put up with a 1/2 degree in order to be with the female, so maybe that's not the entire story. But there are some studies on sharks and rays that show that testosterone levels in sperm production is related to temperature, and as the temperature goes up, sperm production and testosterone goes down. So there might be a very fine line, and perhaps that could be a reason. Yes, the next question would probably be, where are the males? If they're not there, where are they? We've caught them in several places. We usually find them in kelp forests, and we've had our greatest success catching them in slightly deeper water, usually about 30 to 40 feet, right at the edge of a kelp forest. We've tried fishing for them in shallower water, for example in Del Mar, and we've caught mostly females there. So the next step would be to try to actively track males, see what their depth preferences are, and see if they're significantly deeper than the females. Yes. Good, another great question. The question was, if they're gestating in La Jolla and they're not giving birth, then where else could they be giving birth? We've caught baby leopard sharks all over the place. Everywhere but La Jolla. They're caught by surf fishers who are up in Doheny State Beach, also near Newport. I've seen them be captured in Mission Bay, also along the Silver Strand. I've seen them captured there. Trying to think where else. So they're up at, sometimes they're seen in kelp forests, so it's kind of puzzling because you'd think that La Jolla would be kind of a nice place for them to give birth, but again, considering how many hours of snorkeling we've done there, we hardly ever see them. And so I don't think that they're giving birth there. So all these other places seem to be better for the little babies. Yeah. Yes. Great question. So the question is like some lizards or turtles where temperature determines the sex, whether they're male or female. Could that have a role with sharks? As far as we know, there's no, it's not the case with sharks. It's always a 50-50 ratio of male to females in the litter. And although I don't know if it's ever really been tested, if you take a pregnant leopard shark and put them in warm water and another one put them in cold water, if it differs. But as far as we know, there's no temperature control on sex like there are in reptiles. It's a really good question. Yes, way in the back. Yes, so the question is, are there other places where the leopard sharks aggregate like they do in La Jolla? Yes. Places you can see them aggregating include 2 places on Santa Catalina Island, both near the Wrigley Environmental Institute there in Big Fisherman's Cove, in Catalina Harbor on the west side. Elkhorn Slough in Monterey Bay is another place. The ones that I'm naming here are resident aggregations. The aggregations can form in other places, but they tend to be more ephemeral. They don't last very long. The ones that I'm mentioning here, they're there every year and they're there every day. Humboldt Bay up in Northern California is another place where they aggregate. Tomales Bay north of San Francisco. So what's unique about the leopard shark aggregation is that they're not aggregating in a very sheltered bay, cove, estuary kind of environment. They're aggregating essentially along the open coast. I mean, La Jolla is kind of a false bay there, but no other aggregation do we see the kind of wave action and the sort of open ocean hydrography that we do here. So that's why this one's kind of unique. But but the phenomenon itself does occur elsewhere. Yes, ma'am.
How deep in the canyons are the squid how many feet deep?
They can come quite shallow. They tend to be deeper during the day and they'll kind of move up at night to spawn. So the sharks were going as deep as 150, 200 feet. But I mean, I've seen the squid in 20 feet. I mean, they can come quite shallow, almost well over the edge of the canyon sometimes. Yes, yes, Sean. The question is that where the other aggregations form, are they staying in the warm shallows, or are they going on? Do they behave similarly? Yeah. What's interesting is, again, in these shallow estuaries and bays, because they're so shallow, the sharks, they don't really entirely leave the bay. They just kind of hang out in the bay. So they can only go so deep because the whole bay is quite shallow. And there's no wave action, so it's sort of uniformly warm and calm in there. So again, that's what's neat about La Jolla, is that there is so much diversity in the characteristics of the ocean out there. So we can actually see these clear differences of them going into the canyon. Yeah, and basically preferring these warm, calm waters. Yes, great question. So the question is, do the sea lions eat a lot of sharks? And essentially, given the predation risk, is it worth it for the sharks to come to La Jolla every year? It must be, because they come year after year. Every year we do hear of some sharks being killed by sea lions. 1 or 2 will wash ashore and the lifeguards will call me. It's like, hey, just to let you know, we removed it, but this is what happened. So given that predation risk, the benefits of being there, you know, the warm water, the food must outweigh the costs. So yeah, otherwise they wouldn't come. Oh, yes. Great question. So the question is, at what part of the food chain are the leopard sharks? Well, they're not quite at the top of the food chain. So we often think of sharks as apex predators. They're the top predators, and they sort of keep all the prey population in check lower on the food chain. So leopard sharks do that. I mean, they keep maybe the squid in check, they keep the octopus in check, but they're also being kept in check by larger sharks and the sea lion. So they're kind of in the middle, I guess. It's a great question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, another great question. Where do they go in the winter when they leave La Jolla? Half of them go north along the coast, half of them go south. When they come back to the aggregation site and then they leave the following year, the same ones that went south the previous year go south, and the same ones that went north go north. Now, they always seem to pass our northernmost receiver. So we can tell you that the ones that are going south are at least going as far as the border, or at least as far as the mouth of the Tijuana River, so presumably they're going into Mexico too. And the ones that go north, they've passed our Carlsbad receiver, and they have been detected on San Clemente Pier in southern Orange County, which is a receiver that's maintained by Cal State Long Beach up there for tracking white sharks and other things, but we can share data because it's the same kind of equipment. So that's it. We know they're going at least that far, but we've wanted to put receivers farther down in Mexico, but just the logistics are very difficult, and trying to, you know, download the data whenever we want, it's a lot less flexibility. We're still waiting to see if they've been detected at other people's receivers farther north, like in LA. There's another array of receivers up there. We haven't heard from anybody, so we don't know. So yeah, it's still a bit of a mystery where they're going. Really good question. And unfortunately, a satellite tag, which is what some people might think, put a satellite tag on them and then we'll see where they go. Unfortunately, because they don't really come to the surface like, you know, white sharks do, You don't get true GPS kind of satellite tags. You sort of get an estimate of location based on water temperature and daylight, and there's a lot of error involved. So I mean, there could be like 15 to 50 miles of error. So I mean, you would get leopard sharks showing up on the 15 and stuff, and it really wouldn't, it wouldn't be super helpful for us. Yeah, so, and someday if we can get something like that for underwater, it'd be really, really helpful.
A couple more questions. Time for a couple more.
Yes, that would be a really good PhD study.
Repeat the question.
The question was, has anybody studied the guitar fish? Who are there? What are they doing? Why are they there? We catch a lot of guitar fish as bycatch when we're trying to catch the leopard sharks, and we have kept track of the sex, and it's roughly 50-50. I've actually seen guitar fish mating there. So the reasons for the guitar fish being there could be different. Some of them could be the same as the leopard sharks, and some of them could be different. As far as the seasonality, when they show up and leave, I tend to see the guitar fish there earlier. They seem to show up before the leopard sharks, and I seem to see them, when I don't see leopard sharks, I might not see them every day, but I always see guitar fish. So they're there for different reasons, I think, and I think that'd be a great study in the future. Yes, in the back. Same for the bat rays. Again, these are all elasmobranch fishes, sharks and rays. All cold-blooded. They might be there for warmth. I don't know. We don't catch as many bat rays, so I can't really say anything about the sex ratio. So again, another great study that could be done. Yes, sure. So the question is, given the fact that there's aggregations as far north as Humboldt Bay, where the water temperature is obviously colder consistently than here, why would a half a degree or a degree make a difference? Why would they prefer La Jolla? Did I get that right? Yeah. It may just be when given the choice of different water parcels with different temperatures, there's definitely population structure, meaning that there's not a lot of mixing sharks. The ones that are up in Humboldt stay up in Humboldt. The ones that are in Central California stay there. The ones that are down here stay down here. So just regionally, given the warmest temperature, that's kind of where they go. And in Humboldt Bay, if you look at the temperatures of the bay water, way warmer than the coastal water. Huge difference. So that's why they're probably all in Humboldt Bay and not so much along the coast. And that's probably why they don't come down to Central. They probably just stay in Humboldt Bay. So yeah, so I think just a regional, you're given the choice of water temperatures, they're going to choose the best one.
Well, help me thank Andy again for just a truly wonderful presentation.